In a quiet valley, cradled by old green hills, there was a village that never rushed, never changed. The people there rose with the sun, worked the soil with hands like cracked leather, and spoke only when silence permitted. Among them lived a boy named Kian. At 17, Kian was a shadow in the village. Not because he was invisible, but because he was still. He worked beside his father in the rice fields, nodded politely to elders, and never once raised his voice. He did everything right, and yet something was wrong. He didn't want to be there. At night, while others slept, he stared at the hills beyond the fields, the ones wrapped in mist and mystery. The old folks said a monastery once stood up there, long forgotten, home to a monk who'd gone silent for years and never came back. Some said he'd died. Others whispered that he'd simply stopped needing anything from the world. Kian didn't believe in stories, but he believed in silence, and he was drowning in it. It was a morning like any other when the rhythm cracked. Kian's father handed him a sickle, but his hands trembled, not from weakness, but from something heavier. "I can't," he said quietly. His father stared at him as if he'd misheard. "What do you mean?" "I don't know." The words were heavier than stone. His father said nothing, just walked away, leaving behind the rusted sickle lying in the mud like a fallen tooth. That night, Kian didn't sleep. At dawn, with no bag and no plan, he crossed the final field and walked toward the hill, where the monastery might still be, or maybe just the ghost of it. He didn't tell anyone, not because he wanted to disappear, but because he didn't know what he was hoping to find. Only that the village was too small for the questions inside him. The climb was crueler than Kian expected. The path disappeared half a mile in, swallowed by roots and stone. Every breath burned, but he kept moving. Not because he was brave, he wasn't, but because going back would mean facing the same day, the same field, the same quiet he couldn't escape. By midday, the trees began to thin. The wind changed. It wasn't the soft wind of the valley. It had teeth here, sharp and cold. Then, through the branches, he saw it. A crumbling stone archway. Ivy strangled the base. Moss grew like skin across its face. Beyond it lay what remained of the monastery. Just a single hall, its roof collapsed on one side, and silence so thick it pressed against his ears. But someone was there. A man sat cross-legged in the center of the ruins, facing away. He wore no robe, no sign of religion. His clothes were threadbare, feet bare, back straight like iron. He didn't move as Kian approached, didn't even glance. Kian hesitated. "Are you the monk?" The man did not respond. Silence again. Not rude, not angry, just complete. Kian sat down a few feet away. He didn't know why. He returned the next day, and the next. Each time, the man was there, unmoved. No words passed. But something in the stillness held Kian in place longer and longer. On the 7th day, Kian finally broke. "I don't know who I am," he said into the air. "I don't know what I want. I'm not like the others. I don't belong there. The man did not look at him, but he said, with a voice like gravel, "Then stop running from yourself." Kian blinked. His heart slammed in his chest. He wanted to scream, to ask what that meant, but he couldn't. The man had already closed his eyes again. The next morning, Kian woke before the sun and climbed again. The monk, if that's what he was, waited in the same position. But this time, Kian didn't sit. He stood in front of him. "What did you mean?" Kian asked. The man didn't open his eyes. "You've been hiding in silence, but not the kind that heals." Kian frowned. "Then what kind is it?" "The kind that rots you from within." The words stung. He didn't want to admit how true they felt. "I'm not like the others," Kian muttered again, weaker this time. "I don't want to work the fields forever." "Then don't," the man said simply. "It's not that easy." "No," he agreed. "It never is." Kian dropped to the ground, frustrated. "So what should I do? Run away? Become a monk? Meditate until the answers fall from the sky?" The man chuckled, the first hint of warmth. "You think I found clarity by sitting here in the ruins?" Kian glanced around. "Didn't you? I found it by losing everything I wasn't, until what was left was me." The words hung in the air like fog. That night, Kian didn't return to the village. He made a fire from dead branches, watched the stars cut through the dark like knives. He thought about the fields, the silence at dinner, the way his mother barely looked up anymore. He didn't miss it, but he didn't feel whole here either. In the morning, the monk brought him something unexpected: a bundle of rope, a knife, and a wooden block the size of a loaf of bread. "Carve it," he said. Kian blinked. "Carve what?" "Whatever's inside it." Kian narrowed his eyes. "It's just a block." The monk smiled faintly. "Is it?" Kian stared at the block of wood in his hands. It was heavy, rough, and unimpressive. He turned it over. "What am I supposed to see in this?" he asked. The monk shrugged. "Start cutting. It'll tell you." So he did. At first, the blade slipped. His hands were unused to this kind of work. Precise, quiet, without instruction. Splinters jabbed his fingers. The sun moved across the sky, and the only sound was the scrape of metal against wood. By nightfall, he had shaved off barely anything. "It's pointless," he said. "No," the monk replied. "It's uncomfortable." Kian wanted to throw the block into the fire. Instead, he tucked it under his arm and lay down, angry at himself for caring so much about a stupid piece of wood. Days passed. He climbed the hill each morning, sat by the ruins, carved. Some days, he didn't speak. Other days, he asked questions the monk didn't always answer. "What did you do before this?" "Failed." "Why did you stay?" "Because leaving felt like lying." "Are you at peace now?" The monk looked up. "Some days." And just like that, Kian realized peace wasn't a permanent state. It wasn't a mountain you reached and planted your flag on. It was weather, something that came and went, like the wind that now passed through the broken archway, humming through the stones. By the seventh day, the block had shape. It resembled a face, angular, unfinished, but human. Not anyone specific, just a beginning. The monk studied it. "Who is it?" "I don't know," Kian replied. "Good," he said. "That means it's still becoming." And then, without warning, the monk said, "Tomorrow, you don't come here." Kian's stomach dropped. "What?" "Go somewhere else. Find silence in motion." Kian wanted to protest, but something in him understood. Growth wasn't about clinging. It was about release. The next morning, the ruins were empty. The monk was gone. Kian stood in the same spot, the carved block still in his pack, the wind colder than usual. He waited an hour, but no one came. No message, no parting words, just absence. So he walked, through forest, past streams, over ridges he'd never crossed. The village, though only a few miles behind, felt like another life. He wandered until the sun began to fall behind the hills. In a clearing ahead, smoke rose from a broken chimney. A small cottage stood half-collapsed, surrounded by a garden that had long surrendered to weeds. And beside it, an old man with one leg, chopping wood on a stump. Kian hesitated, then approached. "Need help?" The man looked up, wiped sweat from his brow. "Can you swing an axe?" Kian grinned slightly. "I can try." They worked in silence. This silence felt different, earned, not imposed. At dusk, the man offered bread and tea without questions. Only after the second cup did he speak. "You're not from here?" "No." "Running from something?" Kian shook his head. "Not anymore." The man nodded, as if he understood. "Running toward, then. That's better." That night, Kian stared into the fire. His hands ached, blistered from work. His mind, oddly, was still. He pulled out the carving and set it beside him. The old man glanced at it. "Yours?" Kian nodded. "Looks like you." Kian laughed. "It's no one." "Exactly," the man said. "That's the closest it gets." In the morning, the old man was gone. "Off to the market," a note said. Kian left the cottage, unsure where he was headed. But for the first time, that didn't feel like a problem. He didn't know who he was becoming, but he was finally moving, not escaping, becoming. A week later, Kian stood at the edge of the valley, overlooking the village he once called home. Nothing had changed. The fields still stretched like green blankets, stitched by muddy footpaths. Smoke curled from chimneys. The same carts rattled along the same dirt roads. But Kian had changed. He held the carving in one hand, thumb tracing the rough edges of the face he still hadn't finished. He had taken it everywhere, through rain, across rock, beside strangers, and silence alike. He wasn't afraid of finishing it anymore. He walked into the village at dusk. No one stopped him. A few people nodded. His father saw him, paused, and simply opened the gate without a word. That night, Kian sat under the tree behind the house, the one he'd always avoided, the one where he used to dream of leaving. Now, he dreamed of building. He pulled out his knife, held the wood steady. The final cut was small, barely visible, but it was enough. The face in the carving now looked like someone who had climbed a hill, met silence, carved through fear, and returned not as a different person, but as the one he was meant to be all along.